attending tonight. This is the Town Council public hearing, 6:30 p.m. Tuesday, March 23rd, 2021. I would like to call this meeting to order. The public hearing subject matter is our proposed fiscal year 21-22 general fund operating budget, water pollution control fund operating budget, and community pool fund operating budget. With that, Ms. Milton, roll call, please.
Okay, Mr. Orris,
Here.
Mr. Slocum, Mr. Burway,
Present.
Mr. Jenks,
Here.
Ms. Nichols,
Here.
Ms. Pavano, Mr. Talbot,
Here.
Mr. Veliver,
Here.
Mr. Walsh. We do have a quorum present.
Thank you, Ms. Milton. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
The flag
of the United States of America and to the republic
to the
for
republic
which it
for which it
stands,
stands,
one
one
nation,
nation,
under
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with
with
liberty
liberty
and
and justice for all.
Okay, great. So I will now explain the hearing procedure and our agenda. We'll first have a reading of the legal notice. We'll then have a presentation of the hearing subject matter. We'll then open it up to questions or comments. And then there'll be an opportunity for proponents or opponents' statements alternatively expressed, and then any rebuttal if there is any. So with that, I'd like to get a reading of the legal notice. Ms. Milton?
I don't have it, Mr. Chairman. I believe
Ms.
our
Talbot?
next.
Then I'll turn to Ms. Talbot.
Thank you.
Town of Cheshire Notice of Public Hearing, March 23rd, 2021, proposed fiscal year 2021-2022 operating budgets. Pursuant to section -7-1 of the Charter of the Town of Cheshire, notice is hereby given that the Cheshire Town Council will hold a public hearing at 6:30 on Tuesday, March 23rd, 2021 in virtual format for the following purposes: to consider the town manager's proposed general fund operating budget for fiscal year 2021-2022. The proposed mill rate for the fiscal year 2021-2022 is 35.12 mills for real estate, personal property, and motor vehicles. 2, to consider the proposed water pollution control department fund operating budget for fiscal 2021-22. And 3, to consider the proposed community fund operating budget for fiscal 2021-2022. A summary of these fiscal year 2021-2022 operating budgets proposed by the town manager is proposed below, and the citizens are invited to participate and offer oral and written comments. They are also available for public inspection at the office of the town clerk and at the Cheshire Public Library and on the town website at www.cheshirect.org. And the remainder of the notice is the detailed general fund expenditures, revenues, and the pool and community and water pollution control plan expenditures and revenues.
And once again, thank you to the public that are tuning in. I know it's not easy. I think we all are looking forward to getting back to a public meeting where we can be in the same room together and have a little better dialogue. But unfortunately for now, this is the best we can do. And we're certainly looking forward to any public input that is here tonight. And we'll be having another public hearing, so we'll be looking forward to that as well. So thank you again for being here, whoever is here tonight. With that, we're going to go to the presentation of the hearing subject matter. I know our town manager, Mr. Kimball, has a presentation, but before that, I'd like to turn it over to our budget chair, Mr. Borwery.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a brief overview to let everybody know, we have 7 budget workshops that we will be reviewing. We had one last week, and then tonight after the public hearing, and Thursday, and then mostly Tuesdays and Thursdays until middle of April. We'll be reviewing the departments as recommended by the town manager, budget by budget, department by department, looking for ways that we can possibly adjust it in terms of expenditures. The town manager, as you'll hear shortly in his explanation of the budget, has given the town council quite a few options. Some on the expenditure side, such as he has attempted to put back much of the programs that were scaled back because of COVID-19 and last year's budget reductions or lack of increases. And so he has given us the opportunity to decide as a policy matter, do we want to ramp this up on an accelerated basis, or do we want to ramp it up in a more slow manner, and what services do we feel as the people's representatives are the right level of services to have at the right tax level. The other side of the equation is the expense side, is the revenue side. And as you'll hear from the town manager, and he has in his budget notes and memo to us, there are quite a few opportunities for us to consider revenue enhancements that we may want to avail ourselves of. We will not necessarily have a state budget in place by the time we have to adopt at the end of April. So there are some items in there that we as the policy-making body would have to make a decision on whether to include certain revenues or not. How much of fund balance to use. The town manager has judiciously recommended using $1 million of fund balance. We'd used over 2 million last year. So that is a way of trying to get us back to paying rather than using our savings to continue our level of expenditures. So he is, as you'll hear in his summary, shortly giving us a lot to look at. We as a council have a lot to consider over the next month and a half of the level of taxes we want our community to have, our business community as well as our residences, but also the level of services that they've come to expect, and how maybe we can make things a little more efficient, or at least as efficient as possible, with the collective wisdom of our town manager and the town council and all of his staff that have worked so hard on this. So with that, I'll hand it over to town manager Sean Kimball for his budget presentation.
All right, thank you, Mr. Budget Chairman, Mr. Chairman, and good evening, folks. And again, welcome to the currently 5 attendees that we have here on our Zoom call with us. Obviously, there's more folks probably watching at home, but the folks here, just for you, and thank you for bearing with us with this new format a little bit. But what's nice about this is at the conclusion of my hopefully brief presentation, we will be opening it up for public comment. And at that point, you'll be able to raise your hand and unmute it, and you can talk directly to the town council. So we'll work through that right when we get at the conclusion of my presentation here. So thank you to those that are in attendance here on the Zoom call with us. So I will start. I will share my screen. Here we go. There we go. So again, good evening. Here I'll be presenting the operating budget. There will be a little bit on the capital budget at the end as well, because we are presenting both at the same time this season. But I'll get right into it. So the operating budget as proposed is a total increase of 4.57%. You'll see here the major components of those expenditure increases totaling an overall budget of $121,577,000. The general government proposed increase, which is really every town service other than education and also other than the water pollution plan and the community pool, totals an increase of just a little under $1.7 million, so $1,697,000, or a 5.15% increase. The education budget, as proposed by the superintendent and then approved without modification by the Board of Education last month, is an increase of $3.8 million, $3,893,000, or 5.22%. Debt service, you'll see here, shows as a year-over-year decrease. That's due to last year we included, again, very judiciously, the council appropriating $600,000 of surplus from last year into our debt service reserve fund. So while this looks like a decrease, the actual principal and interest underlying that, which we'll get into a little later, is an increase of about $340,000. Capital non-recurring, we use a cash for capital model for some smaller capital items that we don't want to bond for, that on annual basis, we usually put about 1 million or a little more into that fund every year. And so this year proposing flat with last year, 1 million. And then $125,000 we typically budget for a contingency in the operating budget. A little bit of budget context. Obviously, COVID-19 has been the biggest impact on us and on the entire world for the last 12 months. Last year's budget, as Mr. Bowery said, the council was able to put forward a no mill rate, no tax increase budget for the current fiscal year, fiscal 21. Given just the degree of uncertainty and economic impacts and the unknowns from what the COVID pandemic would bring. In order to do so last year, again, as said before, we did rely on a little more fund equity than we typically do. Supported again, though, by the fiscal 20 budget surplus we were able to generate from from shutting down programs, from some layoffs, and other expenditure decreases we were able to absorb in the fiscal year of 20. As it says here, we cut pandemic impacted services in the fiscal 21 budget, including summer maintenance, summer concert series, summer camps, pool staffing, and others. We also froze some vacant positions, including the town assessor position and a patrol officer position in the police department. Again, Board of Education request, as I said before, is about 74% worth of the budget increase, is the $3.8 million that you see there. State budget proposal. State aid is basically flat. It's lower by $20,000 in total, but overall that's effectively a flat budget state aid amount from the governor's proposed budget. I have not included in this budget a potential $759,000 increase in our pilot revenue due to the change in formula proposal that's currently before the legislature. And most of that is driven by our state prison property and the impact that we would have from this payment in lieu of taxes revenue that we would receive from that state property that doesn't otherwise pay taxes. Our union contracts are closer to being settled. We have really 3 out of the 5 on the town side in a settled capacity. We'll talk a little bit later about the federal and state COVID relief funds. Some of this has been, again, very recent information with the passage of the American Rescue Plan bill at the federal level. Grand list growth, we had a $34 million increase in value, which is 1.21% this last year. That follows the previous year, 1.52%, which again, I think is really something to highlight here. These are the highest 2 consecutive years for non-revaluation years in over 15 years. So we've had some good grand list growth in recent days. And this would generate about 1.2 million in revenue at the proposed mill rate. Some more positive news this last year, despite the pandemic in 2020, Cheshire was selected number 28 best place to live in the US by Money Magazine. Norton School was named a National Blue Ribbon School, a remarkable and incredible honor. Highland School was the first Connecticut school to be named a Special Olympics champion school. And our Cheshire Public Schools math and reading and writing performance is currently 5th highest in the state of Connecticut. Our local unemployment data, we are currently the 5th lowest out of 169 towns at a 5.6% unemployment rate. It compares to a statewide average of 8.5%. And just to highlight some recent town survey data, as folks are probably aware, the School Modernization Committee had contracted for a survey that was performed in February. Some of the questions obviously most of them were tied to school modernization and education, but there were a few speaking to general town services and the status of folks' quality of life. And pleased to see that 98.5% of respondents reported quality of life is either very good at almost 66%, or good at 33%. 91.3% responded their current standard of living compared with 2 years ago had either improved at 23%, or there was no movement, but it was good at 68.5%. And 90% reported positive ratings for town services. So just some good news there. I'll just quickly go through our proposed revenues. Again, this current year is a difficult year to budget off of. We did, again, use a higher fund balance than we typically would due to the surplus from fiscal 20. But you'll see that state aid from the actuals in fiscal 20 to what we're experiencing the current year, budgeting for the current year, and recommending is basically flat. Other revenue dipped down certainly for the current year with park and recreation and pool revenue and some other COVID impacted revenues hit. But as you'll hear actually later from the town clerk's office too, the town clerk's office and building department have been really going very well with respect to revenue, particularly with the housing market being what it is and a lot of home projects and other good development happening in town. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And so moving on, here's just the proposed revenues in graphical format. Again, like every Connecticut municipality, property taxes are unfortunately our primary driver or primary source of revenue. And you'll see they make up 83% of our overall revenues for the operating budget. Here's just a brief comparison to 5 years ago. Again, you'll see that payment in lieu of taxes from the state is down over what we used to make by almost $800,000. Town department revenues are basically flat, but grants for the town and Board of Education are down pretty significantly. And so even though we are using more fund equity than we had in prior years in fiscal 17, the difference really gets made up by the property taxes. And unfortunately, that's why you see the mill rate impact that's proposed as part of this budget. But the good news with respect to surplus, so while we did use that 2 million, I know it's a little smaller font here. I'll try to zoom in. But just a quick walkthrough, the council last year was very judicious and careful with its use of fund balance, given the impact of COVID-19. You'll see we were able to do so because we've maintained a very healthy balance. Our unassigned fund balance at the end of fiscal 20, the beginning of fiscal 21, was $12.2 million. Currently, we're projecting a surplus of about $563,000. I think that's only going to go up a little bit with some more recent information. This doesn't assume any additional COVID relief funds buoying that number. So our projected available fund balance at fiscal year end is $12.7 million. So even with the budgeted 1 million that you see here in my proposed budget, we would be at about 10.13% of our overall expenditure budget, or $11.7 million, which compared to our policy, which is maintaining at least 9.25%, we're still about $1 million over our policy. So again, very fiscally responsible. Let me zoom back out here. There we go. Oops. There we go. All right. I'll just go through this pretty quickly. The other significant budget considerations, again, the Federal American Rescue Plan funding. The town, per the legislation, is slated to receive and it does look like that funding is going to be available on a population basis for the municipalities within a given county. If that all comes to be true, that would be an additional $5.6 million for Cheshire. So again, we'll believe it when we see it, but again, that would be very positive for us if that is the way those funds end up flowing through to the municipalities, which is what they were indicating as recently as today. CARES Act funding, again, I won't go through each of these, but throughout the year, we've been applying for and receiving federal aid and pass-through state aid for the COVID expenses that we've been incurring through the year. Last year, we also experienced a tropical storm Isaias, as everyone remembers. We are anticipating $112,000 FEMA reimbursement from a very lengthy FEMA application that we applied for that response. Again, I touched on the pilot formula change that's proposed by the state legislature, and bond refunding. We just had our ratings call last week with both S&P and Fitch, and we're anticipating going to issue our bonds at the end of the month, including a refunding of previous debt, which would generate potential savings to be spread out over the remaining years of those bonds of about $500,000 to $600,000. Proposed expenditures, again, you'll see all the various town departments on the right and the Board of Education budget on the left, the majority there of $78 million. Here are each of those departments. And again, more detail is certainly provided within the budget documents. And we'll be getting into these a little later. But just overall, the key budget drivers, I think this is just important to touch on. Overall, it's a 4.57% budget increase requested on the expenditure side. That's $5.314 million. But what makes that up? The Board of Education, again, $3.8 million. That is 3.35% increase on its own, right, of the 4.57%. The remaining components of that 4.57 are the debt service, not including that reserve transfer I mentioned before. The underlying principal and interest is increased about $340,000, which makes up another 0.29%. On the general government side of things, the contractual salaries and increases, this budget has to account for 2 years worth of budget increase for salaries and wages, given the 0% assumptions we made in last year's budget. Town retirement and pension expenses increased $359,000 due to actuarially required contributions and a phase-in of a lowering of the interest rate assumption that we did last year. Restored positions I mentioned earlier, including the assessor, the police officer, and parks maintenance folks at $274,000. Medical insurance increases $240,000. At this point, I should say that that's a a large part, almost 50% of the Board of Ed's increase is due to medical trust fund depletion and the use in prior years and some bad claims that they are experiencing a need to increase the amount they have to put into the medical trust fund to pay claims. Residential solid waste tonnage increases. This is another COVID impacted item. The town of Cheshire pays for residential trash collection and disposal by the ton. We have experienced over the last year and in the early months of the pandemic, as businesses and restaurants closed down, a lot more folks are cooking, first of all, living and working at home, obviously, but also cooking at home. And so we're seeing about a 20% increase in the tonnage for the curbside trash collection. And that ultimately translates to about $137,000. It's down a little bit from the projections early on, where we were anticipating about 8,500 tons by the end of the year. It looks closer to 8,200 tons, which is what we'll be budgeting for. But again, another impact. We hope people are out and supporting our local restaurants, but we know a lot of people are doing so and then taking the food to go, and therefore the food waste goes into the residential trash stream. So it's not surprising that we're seeing this increase. Plus, again, so many people that are still working from home. Community pool subsidy increase of $87,000, and then Social Security. All other changes in the budget, again, inclusive of that $616,000 reserve transfer, even beyond that is really flat, is really negative. So everything else is either a cut. So these major drivers above really account for the entire budget increase. And so again, as I said before, unfortunately, this does fall to a projected mill rate increase of 1.9 mils, which takes us from the current 33.22 mils, where it's been this year and the prior year, to 35.12 mils. That would be an increase by the evaluation that we do each year, which is an average residential property combined with two average valued vehicles. That would be a tax bill increase for the average resident of about $439 per year. And again, I have every confidence the council will be taking a very hard look at this and finding a variety of ways, as discussed before, for lowering that impact on the taxpayers. I will just kind of very quickly go through. This is our, we've had a history of lowering the amount of debt service that we have to budget for by using some reserve funds very carefully and spread out over a number of years. This is that in sort of more chart format here. We're here in fiscal 22, and you'll see over time we've been using reserve funds, settlements from a lawsuit with the Department of Corrections and a variety of other sources to try to smooth in the increase, mostly due to the water treatment plant upgrade that was done a few years ago. We've been feathering in, kind of smoothing in that debt service impact, and that's something that as we do that, of course, we are having to absorb this increase in future years from where we were before. And this is that kind of just showing, again, this is sort of worst case scenario. This is including some assumptions with capital budget, but we are projecting to have some of our debt service increase, and those reserve funds, unless they're replaced, of course, that will have to be impacting the operating budget as we go forward. So just to touch on the community pool and the water treatment plant briefly, total budget for the community pool as proposed is a little over $1 million at $1,020,853. This is an increase of $87,000 or 9.3%. And that's really because of the assumptions we made last year, knowing we would have the pool closed for some period of time, or certainly that the operations as they are now are dramatically lessened in terms of the ability for us to have a full open recreational swim based on comfort level of patrons and the restrictions put on by the Department of Public Health. And therefore the town subsidy would increase to a total of $483,000 or a 22% increase. The water treatment plant proposed budget is $4 million. This actually represents a decrease of $56,000, and that's really due to the budgeted use of fund balance being decreased from what we proposed in the last year's budget with their contribution to debt service. Again, tonight is the operating budget overview, but I'll just very briefly, we also presented a 5-year capital plan. And only the first year, just for the folks that are watching, the first year is the only year that the council ultimately adopts and appropriates the funds. But we do approve, as part of our fiscal management strategy, a 5-year proposed plan every year, so we can carefully plan for future capital expenditures. Again, the recommended projects, some of our prioritization have been projects that were included previously, also new projects that will lead to return on investment, and also recommended projects, especially on the school side, that will not conflict with any future school modernization plan as those plans are being finalized. Ultimately, there were $92 million of requested projects, which I reduced by 8.8 million. So the recommended 5-year plan for the full 5 years is $83 million. This is an increase of about $15.9 million over last year's adopted plan. But it's important to remember there's $10.6 million of offsetting grants or available cash funding, which reduces the net capital cost of the capital plan to $72,700,000. Just a quick history of our 5-year capital plans for the last 10 years, and you'll see our average plans on a gross level have been about $56 million, or a net about $48 million. And the year one, typically of the last 5 years, has averaged about $9.3 million. In year one net, about $7.6 million. So some of the major projects included are $5.9 million for a proposed phase 1 of the Bartlett South development, about $4.8 million of requested public works, sewer, and public property projects, and $2.65 million of requested Board of Education school projects. And as always, all of our budget documents and additional budget materials are available on our website, our actually very recently redesigned website at www.cheshirecT.org. And with that, I will stop sharing and conclude the presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kimball, for your presentation, and thank you, Chairman Barwi from the Budget Committee. At this point, I'd like to open it up for questions or comments to the public. And Mr. Talbot, I don't know if we have anyone that wishes to speak regarding this subject matter, but now would be the time to entertain those comments.
Sure. So I see that there's in the attendee list right now, there's Nancy and there's a Seth M. I don't know if either of you would like to talk. Please raise your hand. You can click the raise your hand button next to your name or at the bottom of your screen. So if you're interested in doing so, please feel free to click that button and we'll unmute your line.
And Sean, while we're waiting, if they can please give us their name and address for the record, please.
Okay. All right, great. So it looks like Nancy has raised her hand. So I'm going to unmute your name. And Nancy, just as Chairman Orr said, if you could just give us your full name and address for the record. Thank you. Nancy, can you hear us?
Okay.
There we are.
Okay. My name is Nancy B. McAlinden, and my husband and I live at 220 Morse Farms Road. And I'm concerned about the Bartlett development plan. I had emailed my concerns, I guess, a couple of weeks ago. I don't understand at this time why we have to spend so much money on something like that. So I'm done.
Thank you, Ms. McAlinden. I appreciate your comment on that. As Mr. Kimball suggested, this is a proposed budget. And obviously, we've put a lot of work into the Chapman property, and what came out of that, the final product for the Bartlett Park Chapman property was really based on a lot of input from the community. And so Town Manager Kimball decided to put really the first phase of that project into this capital budget, but I can assure you it's going to get a lot of review from the council. The capital budget is going to have a long way to go because you probably also know that we're looking at school modernization and what impacts that may or may not have if that does look like it's going to move forward. So we've got a lot of work to do on the capital budget. We recognize that certainly the first phase is a large amount. It's $5.9 million. And I think I'll just let you know what exactly is in that 5.9 million. It's basically the town green and skate park parking, which is about 80 new spaces, the synthetic turf field, field lighting, and the memorial walk. And correct me if I'm wrong, Sean, if there's anything else included in that.
Those are the major components and some site improvements, but those are the major components.
Great, thank you. So that's really what it includes. And so again, it's going to get a lot of look from the council. This is certainly not cut in stone. I can tell you from my perspective, almost a 2 mil increase is a big number, and it's something that we as a council are going to be looking at to make sure that we can minimize that. We recognize what's going on in the community in light of COVID and so many other issues. So as we always have been in the past, I'm sure we're going to be very judicious as how we use the funds that are available to us. And I can assure you the Chapman property is going to get a hard look. So that's really all I can add to answer your question, Ms. McAlinden. If there's anyone else that would like to try to address that, I'm happy to entertain it. Mr. Barley?
Just to expand upon that, if I could for a moment, the plan that was developed had literally hundreds of people who in town participated in one form or another in helping to design that, and then costs were put to it. And whatever the council decides to move forward, it's over the $500,000, so it will be a referendum question. So it clearly is going to be a community-wide decision whether or not we move forward with that. And I think at a subsequent public hearing, when we concentrate more on the capital budget, we may hear from some people who feel that we have more of a need for fields. This may not be the right cost. It may not be what we can afford to do now. It may be that the council and the citizens decide to leave it as is right now. But there were plans that were drawn up with more citizen participation than I've seen in an awful lot of years in a project. And so it's our fellow citizens that came up with this plan. And if it does pass muster in terms of financial viability with the council, then it'll be a referendum question. So it'll be you and your citizens, fellow citizens, Nancy, that'll be deciding that.
Okay, I appreciate that, but I wasn't even aware. Unfortunately, I read the Cheshire Herald, but I wasn't aware about everything that they were proposing to do with the town green. And I was surprised because we have such a nice town green right now. Is that going to be, taken off the books, and that's not going to be considered the Cheshire Town Green?
That, I don't know, Mayor Orris, did you want to?
Yeah, I can address it, and certainly you can too, Dave. But Ms. McAlinden, what we have is the quote unquote town green now is not town owned property. It's owned by the church. And so, sometimes we're very limited. The church is always very gracious to the town to allow us to use it. But, what was designed out of this Chapman acquisition was really based on a lot of input from the community. And I think the end result reflects that. When, where, and how we begin to implement that is something that the council is going to have to deliberate over. I can assure you, we understand the fiscal impacts that all of these things have on our mill rate and inevitably on the backs of our taxpayers. So as always, I think this council recognizes that we need to be fiscally responsible and keep this community affordable, but we also need to strategically invest in our community to make sure that it stays a great community for all of us to live in. And so I know that we're going to continue to look at our budget, including the capital side, with that in mind. And at this point, I think that's all I can share with you because we're a long way away from making a final decision, not only on the Chapman property, but potentially SMC and a whole variety of other issues that may surface.
Okay,
Anyone
thank you
else?
very much. I appreciate that.
You're welcome, Ms. McAlinden. Any other council members? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Ms. McAlinden, for attending. We really appreciate your input.
Thank you for
Mr.
having
Kim-
this. Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Kimball, anyone else?
So the other currently in there now, Seth indicated in the chat that he's here covering the meeting, so won't be asking a
Right.
question. And no, at this point, I don't think there's anyone else.
Well, thank God for Ms. McAlinden then.
Yeah.
Nancy, thank you.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you
You're
for
welcome.
coming tonight. At least you
Yes.
allowed us to have a little dialogue with the community. We really appreciate that.
Good, good. It's my pleasure.
You have a wonderful night.
Thank
No,
you very
obviously
she's
much.
you're
welcome to
welcome to
stay.
hang
Don't
in and
say
listen.
Yeah, thank you very
Welcome to
much.
stay.
Okay.
And I know it's difficult for the community. This is really not the best forum to have this dialogue, but unfortunately, it is what we're dealing with at the moment. And I know we're all looking forward to, as we've said, to get back together face to face where we can have this dialogue more as a community. But we do really want to hear from the community. So if you're uncomfortable using this forum, please send emails to the council or to our town staff. We are very eager to hear what you have to say about the budget process. We are elected to serve your interest, all of your interest, and it's really important that we understand what you all find most important with the money that you're paying through your tax dollars. So I want to make sure you all understand that. We do take everything you say to heart, so I appreciate that. If there's no other comments from the public in either way, I guess I'm going to go ahead and close this public hearing. Sean,
Arnett, do you
one
want to
last
just
time?
confirm, Arnett, if there's any, I know they also could have submitted to comments at Cheshire. I didn't see any in the inbox.
There are none. I have it
Okay.
open. There are none. Thank
Okay.
you.
Then I think we're
Okay,
set.
then with that, we're going to go ahead and close this public hearing. Thank you very much. And now we will move on to our normal budget committee meeting, which is a meeting of the joint town council special meeting and the budget committee meeting. I'll call that meeting to order approximately 7:05 PM on March 23rd, 2021. We do not need roll call or pledge of allegiance. We'll move right to the first item, which is proposed fiscal year 21-22 operating budget, annual capital budget, 5-year capital expenditure plan to include the town clerk, registrars, town attorney, and public health. And with that, I'll turn it over to our budget chair, Mr. Bowery.
Thank you, Mayor Orris. I would say also that we concluded last week's meeting without finishing a couple of budgets in there. So if, Sean, I don't know if your pleasure is to start with where we left off and then move on from there.
I think if we could, and I know that Laura is here now, if we could start with
Okay.
town clerk.
Town clerk,
and
absolutely.
then maybe go through today, and then we can wrap up with finance and the others.
Okay, absolutely. All right. So Laura, welcome. Oh, she froze.
Oh, there you are. Laura, can you hear us?
Now you're moving. Okay. Now you're all right.
Yeah, hi,
Welcome.
everybody. Thank you so much for
Hi, Laura.
everything that you're doing. It's amazing what you're doing. I really appreciate it. As Sean said, our office is doing really great. We're really busy. It's no secret. We had a really busy year. We're on track for a really good revenue year. We've already surpassed last year's total for the recording revenue. And the conveyance, town conveyance tax is going to be just as high as last year, which was the highest year in 13 years. And the copy revenue is increasing rapidly because we have our own copier now. We get 100% of the revenue from that. So revenue's good. Our expense accounts are all on track too. A couple went over because of the election, but they're covered by the election grant that Cheshire received, $10,700. So those are covered. The contracted services account is a little bit over because of the surge in recordings, but not by much. And it's covered by our revenue from all those recordings.
If I could just, I'm sorry, interrupt real quick, Laura, and just so everyone on your horizontal books is following along, we are on page 13 for the town clerk's overall budget. Really starts on page 15 for the detail
15,
line.
yeah.
And again, while I just quickly have the floor, I just want to say that last year was just such a remarkable year for so many departments, but the town clerk's office went above and beyond. And as I think, while sometimes it feels like a distant memory, I mean, this election was like no other election, not only in its overall consequence being a national election, but in the quick pivoting that the town clerk's office had to do with mail-in ballots and the ballot boxes and the new procedures. And anyway, we've said it before, but I just think kudos is well-deserved for the town clerk's office from last
I
year.
appreciate that. I have to tell you, I counted up how many elections that I worked in, and it was my 49th election that I helped assist in since I started working in the town clerk's office. So, and kudos to my staff because they're amazing and we make a really great team. So, and we couldn't have done it without the temporary help, which was appropriated in 2019. I asked for temporary funds for temporary help out of the special town clerk funds. And we were able to hire 3 people and they were absolutely necessary to help us get through this election. So again, I'm asking for another appropriation for temporary help again, because we did lose 50 hours since I became town clerk in 2016. We've lost 50 hours. And my staff and I, we can do this. We prioritized our work and we're making it work, but we really need the temporary help. So that would be really great if the special town clerk funds could be approved that I'm asking for. But I don't know if you have any questions on the revenue or the expenses. We can go right into the special town clerk fund request.
Thank you, Laura. Any questions from members of the council?
Anybody?
Well, pretty
Well,
well.
Laura, I
presented.
would just like to thank you and your staff for working so hard. I know you've been working very diligently and when you're really busy. And we know that we've asked you to do more with less.
Yeah.
And we really appreciate that. I know the taxpayers appreciate that. It was one of the ways that we were able to keep the mill rate flat. We're obviously all very concerned about what may come down the road from reimbursements from the state. There are some good numbers, but there's also some very uncertain numbers out there as well. So we appreciate you being a team player and continuing to do what you do with what we were able to approve in last year's budget. And, you know, I look at your budget this year as being something that is a bare bones budget. I see no real issues with it, and I appreciate how hard you're working with the staff that you have. So thank you.
That's great. Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah. So,
So anyway, if there's no other questions, Laura, please continue.
well, the only thing I just wanted to cover was the special town clerk funds request. I have some, yeah, exactly. So I'm not asking for any money out of the historic document fund because I'd like to beef that up. But the other two, the community investment, $25,000, and the MERS account, $20,000, just for more shelving in the vault, sliding shelving, which works out really well. The commission books are really expanding fast, and we need that extra shelving space for the commission books. The $18,000 for digitizing land records will really help us a lot because it'll bring our online records back to 1980. And a lot of people since COVID are making their own copies right from their own homes. And we still get the revenue from that. So it works out really great because the people don't have to come in the office. And then the part-time supplementing our office, the $17,000 really will come in handy because we've worked it out for temporary help to come in just for 15 hours a week. She picks up all the things that we couldn't get to during the week. And it really helps us finish off our work and stay current because, you know, a lot of our work is time sensitive and we need to get things done in a certain time frame according to state statutes. So that's the request for 2021. The last appropriation that I asked for in 2019 that was approved is just about expended now. So now it's time to ask for the next one. And I hope you'll approve that.
Thank you, Laura. Anything else you want to add? Any questions or comments? I think I saw Mr. Veliver.
Laura, just a quick question for you. What year are you back to now? I can't remember where you were able to get back to. And so I'm just trying to, how many further years does that extra money get you back? How much further back is 1980 from where you are now?
Well, right now we're at 1987.
Okay.
So the $18,000 will get us back to 1980. And then there's grant money that we're going to use to digitize also for the 2022 grant from the state, and that will get us back to 1973. So we're trying to get back as far as we can using the funds.
That's much appreciated. I know, as you said, now with COVID, many town clerks aren't even open to the public, and title searchers can't even come into the office to check those things.
Right.
You know, more and more of those title searchers are being relied on to get that information, and the further back these towns can go to make it available digitally for them to get, I think is very helpful. Some towns you can't even get back more than 15, 20 years, and it's tough to do a full title search when you can only get back 15 or 20 years. So here, if we can get back to 1980 or beyond, we could actually, searchers can do a full search. I think that's going to be a valuable resource for the searchers as well as the people buying houses. They have a better idea of what they're buying. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it works out really well. And we still get the same revenue as if someone were coming into our office and printing out the copy.
From the copy, so you still get that same, you still get
copies.
Right,
So
you still get $1 per copy
Yes.
anyway, right? Okay,
That's correct.
great.
Yeah,
and everything's working out well with IQS?
perfect. Yeah, they're coming out with a new marriage program so that people can fill out the application online and then we can print it right from their information. So there'll be less errors as far as typos and because if the people are loading the information themselves, they should have it correct.
We hope so.
Yeah, they're always on the cutting edge of new products for us. And that should go into effect this year sometime.
Great, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thanks for all you do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Veliver. Mr. Talbot.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, Laura. Question and a comment. Actually, maybe this is more of a Sean question than a Laura question, but whoever's got it can jump in. Just trying to get a sense of what the balances are in those 3 accounts.
Yeah, I checked today. In the historic document fund, there's 21,300. That's the one that I'm not taking any money from, that I'm
Right.
not requesting money from. The community investment fund has 34,800. And the MERS fund also has 34,700.
Thank you.
And I think I noted how much each account brings in on a monthly basis also in my detail. The historic document brings in monthly about $530 and the community investment fund brings in about $260 a month. The mortgage electronic registration fund, the MERS fund that we call it, that brings in about $1,000 a month. And that's all off of recording fees. So with the real estate market the way it is, we're getting a lot of recordings. We're up higher, the highest in the last 7 years. So a lot of people are refinancing with the low rates. And if there's enough inventory in town for houses to sell, there's going to be a lot of deeds, warranty deeds coming in. So all those recordings make up the money that goes into these accounts.
Excellent. And then my comment was more of a kind of a off the cuff comment about maybe we shouldn't be using the acronym for that last account. Maybe we should call it something else and stay away from the term MERS.
MERS. Oh, right. Yeah. we just call it MERS, but we'll think up another name for that.
Thank you, Laura.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Talbot. Ms. Nichols?
Oh, you're muted.
Oh, you're.
Sorry, trying to keep the dogs out of this meeting. First of all, for those of you who haven't been in the town clerk's office in any depth, I have to commend Laura and her staff for the organization and the reorganization of the document room. She's given me several tours, and each time I go in, it's even better. So because of that, I want the public to understand that this is one of the departments that has direct bearing on the success of your purchases of your homes, your licenses, your dog licenses, all of that. So this is one of the departments in the town hall that you would probably interact with fairly frequently, and I commend them for being as organized as they are. So when you go in to renew your dog license or to get your, I guess you don't do fishing licenses anymore,
Yeah, we
right?
do.
Oh, you do? All right.
Yeah.
Fishing license. Or have the mortgage researched and the title searched on your home when you're trying to move. Make
Yeah.
sure that you appreciate those people that do that for you. So basically that's what I want. But if anybody on the council or watching here is, you should go in and have a tour of that town clerk's office.
Yeah, we would love that. I'll
It's
tell
very-
you, my staff and I really love the work we do. It's interesting work, and we really do enjoy our work.
It's clear you do. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Nichols. Other questions or comments from members of the council? Okay, seeing none. And just one last thing, Laura. I certainly appreciate once again how well you're working with the staff that you have. and I really do support using this temporary staff to help you. The real estate market has been very strong, and I know that's put more pressure on you. I think we're very hopeful that that will continue because it's good for our community, but it does put more stress on your department, as Ms. Nichols just suggested. So we recognize the fact that you're doing more with less, and that's why I'm going to wholeheartedly support, these temporary workers that you're going to use. And the fact that it's coming out of these other revenue accounts is really good. And so, for me, I think it's a no-brainer. And I appreciate, again, everything you
Right.
and your department's doing.
Well, that's what the funds are for. I appreciate that. The funds are for the town clerk to run the department. And if we need the money to help with temporary help, I'm perfectly fine with using it. I think if our average amount of documents per year is about 6,600 over a 20-year period, that's our average. So if we get up to about like 7,000 or 8,000 documents a year, I think it might be time to add a full-time person. But we're not there yet. But if we get there, I think it might be a good idea to take a look at that.
And certainly, I think we understand that. And that's why I want to underscore to the community that you are under more pressure today as a department because of the velocity of the real estate market, especially. And so that doesn't go unnoted on me, and I'm sure the rest of the council. So thank you again, Laura.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Anything else from you, Laura, on your budget?
No, I had requested, with salary expenditures, but I'm looking at page 15 and I see the deputy town clerks. I see the number there and that number is fine with me. If that's the correct number, the deputy and I are fine with that. And with the temporary help, we're fine with that also. So if that's good, I'm fine.
Great. Thank you, Laura. Any
You're
questions or comments from members of the council? Okay, seeing none. Laura, thank you so much for taking the time, and thanks again for all you and your department are doing. And make sure you thank them on behalf of all of us.
I will. And thank you so much. And anytime, stop in and come and see the new vault.
Sounds great. Thank you.
All right. You're welcome. Thank
Okay,
you.
I turn it back to you, Mr. Bowery.
All right, we have next the registrar's budget, and we should all be in receipt of an email from the registrar outlining his thoughts on his budget. And that came in this afternoon. So I thought, Sean, do you want to do a quick run through there? Didn't seem like there's an awful lot of change.
No, there's not. It's a pretty flat budget. Again, I would also echo the same compliments that we were paying before on a remarkable current fiscal year, given the election. Again, the registrars were right there in the same vein with again, just a remarkable, unprecedented year from a workload standpoint. So our hats are off to them. And I do know they're available if needed. I think I see them in the attendees room if there are any specific questions, but as you'll see, the overall budget is effectively flat. I made a few very, very small adjustments to their budget. But again, it's largely a status quo budget. I think if there's any questions with respect to anticipated, I think the one item that's not in there, of course, are with respect to any special elections or special referendum, which I don't believe are on the horizon, primaries and the such. But I think everything in my meeting with them was included and sort of validated for what we expect the next fiscal year to include with respect to election events. But other than that, I think happy to try to answer any questions, or certainly could bring in Tom or Susan if there are any more questions for them.
I would just want to echo what you said. We had a much more labor-intensive election with the absentee ballots, and that made it very difficult. Could not have been anticipated because the law didn't allow for that. But we had emergency situation, and so that's what allowed it to happen. And they really have worked hard on that. And I think the budget for the coming year is a reflection of what's realistic and planned. Are there questions? Should we get them to come in, or is this one that's pretty straightforward?
Well, I think we should give them an opportunity if there's anything they'd like to add.
Sure.
And then obviously, if we have any questions, would be great. So Sean, you want to invite them in and see if they have anything to say?
Hopefully,
they took the time to come in come tonight and get in
Absolutely.
logged on. So that's great.
So Tom or Susan, I believe you're now in. I see your names down
They're
the
muted.
bottom.
So thank you, Tom and Susan, for being here. I see that at least you're still muted. But we'd certainly love to hear from you if you have anything more to say regarding your budgets. And again, also just like on the clerk's department, you guys worked really hard this year. We recognize that. We appreciate your hard work and thank you for that.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
I would agree with what Mr. Burley and Sean have said. Really, the only thing that we need is some extra storage space. We need a new file cabinet, which I believe is included in the figures. We're, we have a lot of voters in town now.
I don't know, Tom. That sounds like a really big ask to me.
Yeah.
Expensive. Yeah.
All right. How about a new padlock for the vault? then?
Yes.
Okay.
But apart from
Sorry.
that, everything is pretty flat. So, and I think Susan will agree with me that without the cooperation and hard work of the town clerk's office, we couldn't have done this. And we don't know what the election is going to look like in the fall because we can't anticipate what the public health situation is going to be. But if we can keep working in a good cooperative environment with them, I think we'll be okay. So that's really all I have to say.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Tom. Susan?
I'd like to also thank the community as a whole, because we, in the end, had more people than we could use, believe it or not. It's the first time ever for any election. We put a couple calls out. People were very interested in this election, of course, being presidential. But what really, it was amazing how many people we had that came through and said, I'll do whatever, whatever you need. It was wonderful. So it was really a community that came forward and, knew we were kind of behind the 8 ball. We had people out on COVID and quarantine, and we were losing people the day before. So all in all, it worked out well. But, thank you to everybody out there that, that came forward to help us out.
Thank you, Susan. That's what the Cheshire community always does, right? They rally around whatever cause is necessary. So thanks for bringing that up. Questions, comments from members of the council? Okay, seeing none, I think that's pretty easy then. Tom and Susan, thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for all your hard work.
Okay, thanks.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Back to you, Mr. Bowery.
All right, then we move on to the town attorney's budget. A little different because we have a new contract, which will cover all of next fiscal year. I think some of those numbers are reflected in there.
That's right. So, if everyone wants to flip to page 12, 11 and 12 in your book. Again, obviously this is relatively recent change as the council made just last month or month and a half ago, I guess. And so we have shown the proposed budget at $216,000, $216,422. That's made up of legal fees, which I'll just touch on briefly in a second, but also the hearing officer position budgeted at $3,600 and a placeholder for mediation or arbitration of $15,000. The legal fees budget, just so the council's aware kind of what we're assuming here, included in that $197,000, there is the retainer for the new Sila and D'Onofrio firm that we have switched to, which again is with a 20-hour per month, so a different assumption based on the retainer that we had previously, but that ultimately totals $111,000 even. We've also assumed an additional 20 hours per month of additional work, which totals about $46,000 in addition to the retainer. And also there's a $10,000 inclusion for assumed ongoing expenses with respect to Mirtha that may carry over from the existing contract if there's anything that's outstanding. So there's a $10,000 for placeholder there, and $30,000 that's assumed for labor. Bertram and Moses, our current labor attorney. $30,000 is a a solid number we feel there for our anticipated labor expenses for the next year. So all told, that's 197,000, which does represent, a decrease overall in the entire budget line of about 36%.
Thank you, Mr. Kimball. Any questions or comments from members of the council? Seeing none. And just so the public knows, we spent a lot of time, and I thank our planning committee for spearheading it in this new selection. And it was a really tough decision. And in the end, we were driven by who we felt would be the best firm to represent our community and give us the best representation and the best service. But third, I think we were all hoping that we could save the taxpayers some money at the same time. And I think we're hoping that this new contract reflects that. So again, not looking to have any dilution in service and quality of representation. But if we can maintain the quality or improve the quality and save the taxpayers some money, that was our goal. And that's what's reflected in this budget. And I hope that we can adhere to it. So thank you, Sean, for that, and everybody that participated. Mr. Barway.
All right, seeing no further questions regarding town attorney, public health is scheduled for next, but Sean, you and I were talking, Maura was probably not gonna be able to make it, and I assume she's not in the waiting room, and
Yeah, she's not gonna be able to make it. There are a few other items in public health we could just touch on real quick,
Sure.
so that when Maura's available, we could kind of bring her in, if that's okay. It should only take a few minutes.
absolutely.
That works for you. So for this, you need to flip to, hold on. Let's save this. There we go. Page.
194.
Thank you. 194. I had it bookmarked and then it went away. Page 194. Under miscellaneous. There we go. So again, we'll talk about the Chespercott request at a later date. But the other items, just so everyone's aware, that make up the total $612,000 public health budget. The other large ticket item is ambulance services with Trinity. And this is a contractual arrangement. We were in the middle of the contract, so this is a contractual adjustment. And that totals $223,000. And other than that, there is the, the Western CT Coalition, the HVCASA fee of $2,000, and then Northwest Public Safety, this fee that we split with Trinity historically, and that's at $6,100. So again, just a couple of smaller items in our public health budget, but the largest of which being ambulance services for the town, which is budgeted here in the public health line, in addition to the Chespercott funds. So that's really the high-level overview of these lines.
Mr. Barway, anything to add?
No, I think the changes that our Chespercott district has is the biggest effect on this area of the budget. I think the others, as Sean said, are pretty straightforward. You folks had a contract with the ambulance service already, and just continue to have that.
Great. Mr. Barway, what's next?
Next would then be going back to the ones that we left off last week. We can go to general services. I think we were concluding employee benefits, right?
I think we had, I think we were, if it works for you, it'd probably be good to go through maybe finance with tax and assessor first, and then general services, if that
Sure.
works. Jim, I know you're ready to kind of answer some questions on your budget. So
Sure.
if we can pick those off, maybe that's the best.
Yeah,
way.
so I thought we could go through quickly finance and general services tonight. And if we have time, there's debt service as well we could take a look at.
So Jim, do you want to start on page, just so everyone's on the same?
Yeah,
page
so
20?
the big book, the summary book, just a little overview of the department. Finance department is on page 64 and 65. That's the big,
Of the
big
vertical.
summary book.
Right, okay.
Kind of an oxymoron. It's the big summary book, and then the little book is the detail book. So
Page 22 and 23. I think it
22 and
starts.
20.
Of the detail, yep.
Right. Actually, starting on page 23 and 24 gives an overview of the department. The total manager recommended budget for the entire department is $2.347 million. That's on page 23 in the detail book. And just for the record, finance includes 6 different divisions. There's accounting and treasury, collector of revenue, assessor, general insurance, audit, and technology is a pretty big one. So we'll spend a little bit of time on that. And I'm just going to kind of walk through, I think, the detail book for starts. And if there's any questions, on page 24, the finance department's pretty salary driven between the accounting, collector of revenue, and assessor positions. You can see on page 24, there was an increase of 1 position in the assessor department for a new assessor. We've been running pretty lean in that department this past year. We had a total of 13.14 full-time equivalents for this department. And so there's 1 position that we put in the manager recommended budget to restore that assessor position. Accounting and treasury starts on page 25. It's a $671,000 request. There is a 4.82% increase in the accounting treasury department. That's my office. You're going to see, I think, in a lot of the budgets this year, the increases might be a little bit higher than they otherwise would be. There were no salary increases put in fiscal 21. And I understand some of the union contracts now, there's going to be some retroactive increases for fiscal year 21. So we're going to end up doubling up on those, I think, in pretty much all the departments. Salary increases will reflect pretty much 2-year increases. And I just want to throw that out now because I think that you're going to see that a recurring theme in a lot of these department requests.
Jim, while you're there,
Sure.
can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Can you just explain the 20% increase in overtime?
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
Now, just so the public knows, it's not a huge line item. It's a line item from last year that was a $25,000 appropriation. You're asking for 30,000. So,
Yeah.
when you say 20%, everyone gets nervous, but as a percentage, it's big, but as a dollar amount, it's not
every
huge.
year I try to limit the amount of overtime here, and I think it always ends up being a little bit more. If you could see, the last year actual was closer to $30,000 is what I'm requesting. Unfortunately, we're plagued with a lot of deadlines in this office. And even, I'm just going to use December as an example. We have our audits due, and in January, all of our tax forms are due. It just seems like we struggle here to meet all the deadlines we have to meet throughout the year. We also provide a lot of support during the budget process and the capital budget process. Honestly, just putting these budget books together takes a fair amount of time. I will say a lot of the overtime is not time and a half overtime. It's for probably 10 years now. I have several part-time people in this office that were cut about a decade ago. And they generally do work over their 25 or 30-hour part-time week. But up to the extent that they work up to 35 hours, that additional time ends up going into the overtime account. And, we're doing the best I can with a lot going on in this office.
Well, you're doing pretty darn good, Jim, with you and Gina and your staff. I can tell you that. And one of the big reasons we have our AAA credit rating is because of you and your department. So I'm not suggesting that I have a problem with that. I just wanted some background on it. But you and your staff deserve a lot of credit because you have had an enormous amount of moving parts, very, very tough financial situations going on. and you've guided us so that the council can make tough decisions for our community. And without that great representation from you and your staff, it would be very difficult for us as part-time volunteer elected officials to do with a really good way. So thank you, Jim.
Well, thank you. I just wanted to add too, there's a lot of times where we're here on the weekends through the course of the year when we have to roll over the year and on our accounting system. A lot of these things we can't do during the course of the regular week because we'd have to kick everybody off the financial system to do it. And we also this past year migrated to a cloud service for our financial system. So there were a lot of times we were here on the weekends just trying to get those things ready to go so that everybody could be productive during the work week in all the other departments.
I
Okay,
would
moving.
also note, just on that vein, as what Rob was saying, that you've been helping the SMC, and there's more work to do with that, certainly. So that's something that wasn't necessarily anticipated early on. You'd have to spend so much time helping run the numbers there.
Dave, he was hoping to forget about that.
Yeah,
for a night.
it's what I've been working on the last 2 days.
Yeah.
But Mr. Orris, to your point too, you talked about the great job that Jim's department does, and in our budget books, we kind of take it for granted, but on the very first page is talking about again receiving the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award, and this is multiple years running. I don't remember a year that I've been on the council that we didn't get it. And like I said, we take it for granted, but it is no small feat. Not every town gets this. And I think it's a testament to the job that all the staff does, but your department in particular, and we appreciate the work that you do, Jim.
Thanks, Peter. I know we all have a lot of pride in what we put out from this office.
David?
Sorry, I was muted. Yes.
No, I want to echo Peter's comment, but I have a question for you, Jim.
Sure.
As we go through this school modernization project in the next 2 or 3 years, do you anticipate that adding a significantly larger amount of time for your office, requiring more help? Because as we get into the things, or will that all fall to your office, I guess?
I think it'll all fall to my office and somehow we'll absorb it. I'm pretty confident we'll be able to.
Okay. Well, you absorb everything without it, and just always with a smile, so that's good. But I want to make sure that you have the ability to get the work done timely without putting undue stress and pressure on the staff. That's all. Yeah. Okay.
We're good.
Good.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on to the collector of revenue. And again, if anybody has any questions on any of the specific divisions, collector of revenue, 327,995 is the
Jim, what page are we on? Jim, is that page 27?
27, yes.
Thank you.
Yep. Total request of 327,995, again, a 4.65% increase. And again, this office is largely salary driven. So again, that's probably representing to a large degree the fact that there's going to be 2 years of increases in paid out of one fiscal year. At least that's what we're projecting. On page 29. Oh, and I just want to compliment the tax office too, with COVID and everything else, and instituting a number of programs this past year, deferred interest program, probably one of the biggest, in really trying to take a good look at the legislation to make sure we were complying with all the various components of it. I just, have to say kudos to that department. They did a great job instituting procedures to try to collect as much money, offline or online, so to speak. And our collection rate Right now for this budget, I used the 99.65% collection rate, a little bit lower than our historical 99.75 or greater. But I think we're going to be doing a lien sale again in another month, and I'm pretty optimistic that we'll be right back where we always have been, in light of COVID and in light of the deferment and various other programs that we instituted this year. The assessor department, page 29, a total of 252,466 is the request. It's a 45.06% increase. And again, this is for the restoration of an assessor in that department. I will say there's been two people in that office, and one's only been there a couple of years. So that's down from 4 people that were in that office with many more years of experience just a couple of years ago. On top of that, we're coming off a revaluation. As you know, there's been a lot of cases going back to the 18 reval. And by the way, some of those have dragged on a little bit longer perhaps than they normally would. I would have hoped a lot of those cases were closed by now, but with COVID, a lot of that dragged out, and we still, as you know, I think there's another half dozen or so cases that we're still pending. But I will say, you know, I'm here on weekends occasionally, and I know the assessor office was here too quite a bit, especially during the fall, trying to get all the program numbers together for the various, you know, elderly credits and veteran credits, personal property declarations. There's quite a bit that goes on in that office, you know, through the course of the year to make sure we get a good grand list. So I don't know if anybody has any questions, but
Jim, I have a quick question. I know last year's budget, we appropriated 6,000 in overtime. Again, not big numbers.
right.
Your actual expenditure looks like it's about 11,000.
Yeah.
And then you've budgeted 11,000 for this budget here. But my question is, you've also asked for another employee. So I'm just curious, if we approve the full employee, the new employee, why is the overtime staying the same?
That's a good point. I think, you know, we could take a look at that overtime, that if we do get an extra position there, I think there's going to be definitely an opportunity to reduce the overtime. I know that the interim assessor, I don't believe is getting paid overtime at an overtime rate. So, you know, that, and she was here putting in a lot of time, nights and weekends, through the course of the year. Especially again, she kind of single-handedly got that grand list together, and it was a good grand list. So I was real happy with the results.
Sounds good, Jim. And as you know, just for the public's edification, you know, one of the things that the council always takes a hard look at is balancing adding new employees to a particular department against overtime. And obviously overtime can become very expensive, and it's just a better opportunity, and it's just more cost efficient to add an employee, so you avoid a lot of that overtime. So that's something we're going to be looking at heavily in these budgets. And so, you know, if you tell me that we can eliminate the overtime or, you know, go back to something more nominal, obviously that plays into our decision about whether we want to approve the next full-time employee or not.
Yeah.
If I could add, Mr. Chairman, just one
Sure.
point about this position too, kind of in that same vein. You know, the assessors, and Jim referenced the fact that this office used to have 4 positions in it. I do think when you're down to 2, you are kind of missing out on that opportunity for additional revenue generation that really we don't have. When there's 2 people, you're really going to have those 2 people in the office almost all of the time. And that ability to get out into the field and do inspections, frankly, just drive around, look for work or structures that haven't been permitted and that are discovered, you really, you know, a savvy assessor will basically pay their own way, so to speak, with respect to generated revenue that they can find out in the community, and with businesses that maybe didn't properly pull permits or things weren't closed out properly or whatever. So I would add kind of to that point, this is one of those positions I really see as important to restoring, because as good as our grand lists have been in recent years, I think they can be even better as we find some of this stuff. We know there's work that goes on that isn't always permitted, and if that deck or that pool or whatever gets added to the grand list, that really helps our overall revenue position, and it's more fair for everyone else that did follow the rules.
So to that point, Sean, can we rely on some additional revenue, or did you assume some additional revenue if we hire this new position?
Yeah, I mean, I think we would certainly, it's harder probably to quantify, but I think that we could probably assume some additional revenue. Jim, would you agree on that?
Yeah, and the grand list all affects the tax rate calculation and so forth. So we could certainly take a look at what we might be able to.
And I'm not trying to,
Yeah.
be too much of a penny pincher, but all of this plays into the decision. To the extent we can count on a little bit more revenue, we can count on a little bit less overtime. It makes it a lot more appealing to add that position, and much more defensible to the public to show them that we're judiciously spending their tax dollars.
Yep.
So thank you.
Also, it's a little different tact. I have a question. I know we did the last reval was 2018 year. When do we begin the work and the setup and the ramp up for the work for the next reval?
Yeah, I want to say we're kind of in the middle of things right now, but it's not too long before we start the next process. I'll probably get into that more when we talk about the capital budget, because I do have funds requested there. So maybe we could table that.
Well, my reason for asking that is it might tie in with the fact that we
Do
may
this.
want somebody on
Absolutely.
board to be able to help with that from the
Yeah.
beginning of ramping up. So,
Yeah, and maybe we could look at some of that capital requests after this.
okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, it is included in the first year of the capital.
Yep.
It's now
Okay,
moved
so
its
then we
way
should
up.
talk about it.
Yeah, so for fiscal 22's capital, which of course now we're talking about a little earlier than we would historically, as opposed to the summer. But I think that's really the first step, and then bidding out, getting that firm on board really happens, right, Jim, within the next 9 to 12 months, really,
Right.
before we start developing the 23 grand list.
Yeah, it's kind of a long process to get ready
Yep.
for that.
I remember a year and a half or 2 years or something. That's
Yeah.
why I just wondered when it might be proper to have the person on board to help with that and help manage that. Okay.
All right. The next on page 31 is audit. Requested 33,270. We did an RFP about a year ago this time. We started that RFP process. So our auditors have been on board for 1 year now. This is for the second year of that 3-year contract. And actually, it's a 3-year contract with the option to renew for an additional 2 years. This represents 50%. Board of Ed picks up an equal amount in their budget, but it is a contractual amount, so I won't spend a lot of time on that. I think we do get a pretty good rate as far as our audit fees. And on page 32, general insurance. The request being 535,896 with a 6.61% increase. This is all our various insurances except for workers' compensation. And the one thing I want to say is generally we hope to get better numbers before the budget process is over. But this is what we were told our increases could look like this year. But I hope to get back to you sometime in the coming weeks with fine tuning this and maybe bringing it down a little bit. It's been challenging the insurances because of all the storms, in part have increased at a pretty good clip in recent years. And we are exposed to perhaps new risks that we weren't exposed to years back. For example, cybersecurity has become a bigger problem, and we do have, and we just added on, I think, in the last couple of years, cyber insurance. So hope to come back to you in the coming weeks with hopefully favorable adjustments for this division. Finally, on
Mr.
Yep.
Velber? Oh, you're on mute.
There we go. Jim, just a quick
Yeah.
question then. In light of that, are you saying and that you think that this number might be the worst case scenario and that it could get better from here?
Historically, that's the way it's worked. And you know, I'm not sure as we get further into the year, our consultants have, you know, more information as far as what our trends are, and perhaps a better idea of, you know, how competitive the market is. But I want to say the trend has been that they have been able to come back with better numbers before the budget process was over.
Okay. Thank you.
Page 33, information technology. This is a $526,000+ request. It's actually a decrease of 2.59%. And I want to say, I wouldn't put a lot of weight on the decrease. It's pretty status quo if you kind of go through line by line. And there's a lot of detail here. If you look at page 34 and 35, it's kind of mind boggling, but just going to kind of summarize a few of the things that we have here. Our IT department, we don't have any employees. This is a contracted service. Actually, our contract is expiring this June. I put in a modest increase with a request of 110,000, a little over the 105 that was for that contracted service the year before. But the bottom line is we're going to have to negotiate a new contract for the new fiscal year. And I think we've recently tried to get a technology committee meeting together, and you know, maybe we can take a look at that in a little bit more depth at the committee level.
Tim, quick question on this.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to put Sean on the spot, but you had requested $394,000, almost $395,000 as a department request, and that was cut by a little over $60,000 to $332,000. What was cut?
Yeah, that was
Sorry, I was muted.
Yeah, so
yeah,
you're
there was
looking
a
at the
request
overall.
for time and attendance software.
Yeah, I'm looking at the overall, Sean.
Yep. Yeah, so there's, on the overall, there's two. So there's within that long detail that you see from 34 that carries on to page 35. Yeah, that 62,645 adjustment is the combined. So if you see the very last line on page 35, see that there, 62,645. All right, so that one is, there was a request that the new addition to that detail, everything else there we've been using or has been recently implemented in the last couple of years. That was a request that Jim has had, and this has been a discussion within our departments for a while, of an upgraded, or actually to implement a time and attendance software package. We right now rely on a paper-based, kind of very cumbersome timesheets, and there's only really one department, the PD, that has sort of a more traditional electronic, well, I say traditional, but more modern electronic time system. Everyone else, I mean, there's punch cards at the DPW and whatnot. So it's something we'd love to implement in a perfect budget year. I just felt this year we didn't quite have the room to add that improved service. I think down the line, it would create a lot of efficiencies and certainly help out payroll a lot with kind of last minute paper-based adjustments to the payroll. But at this point, because it was a new ad, I wasn't comfortable adding it into the budget. And then the other adjustment in 5602 at the bottom of page 36, you know, for a few years now, and again, in a perfect budget climate, we'd be budgeting our replacement hardware, specifically workstations. If you recall, last year, we had a number of workstations that needed to be updated. We actually did make an appropriation out of CNR for kind of a
Give us a discount.
one-time shot, which we were really appreciative to have because that was the funding I was able to redirect from desktops to some laptop purchases as we were making these purchases right when COVID was hitting, so that some folks could be spun on remotely. But we've been kind of budgeting for those replacements in the capital budget or in CNR. Because it's such a regular business expense, I'd like to see eventually hard drives, monitors, keyboards, computers, and those things budgeted in the operating budget. But so IT requested 55,000 to kind of build that tradition going forward, but we're gonna have to hold off, I think, for this year. There is still $10,000. I mean, yeah, you hope you get 5 years out of a good computer these days, and that's kind of more appropriate for the 5-year payback that we kind of self-fund through CNR. But no, agreed. I mean, in a perfect world, we would have already had that in the operating budget. Unfortunately, it's hard to always build those things the first time. We do need to kind of carve out some space. We do have $10,000, which I think at least buys a few workstations a year. And again, supplemented with that appropriation last year that was able to, we were able to, the really legacy ones, the ones that weren't going to be supported anymore, that couldn't support the modern Windows package, those we've been able to replace with the kind of more critical update last year.
So the time and attendance software, at some point I'd love to know, I'm sure the council would, what efficiencies we gain by implementing that and whether it saves us money elsewhere. So, obviously we'd love to find ways to make Jim's department more efficient. And if the investment in that is a good payback to the taxpayer, I think we ought to be listening. So I'd like to know more about that line item. And the last thing that I would ask you, Jim, is, having up-to-date computers and the like is really important to a finance department. So are you comfortable you've got what you need with the reduction in that line item?
I know my entire office got new laptops this year, and thank God we did, because there was a lot of times where we were working from home during this recent COVID event. And frankly, when you have to get payable checks out the door, or payroll out the door, I don't know what I would have done if I didn't have that flexibility.
Yeah, there were a few fortunate, again, we take some credit ourselves for certainly trying to plan these things, but the timing of having that request coupled with the already in the works request to move Munis to the cloud and other things, we were better positioned than we would have been if we hadn't taken some of those steps for the temporary weeks that we had people working remotely. So
But that $55,000 reduction is reasonable, it sounds like.
Well, I think in part because we do have some funds still set aside in our capital non-recurring funds for this type of technology.
Okay.
And we'll
So
look at that too.
So we're going to see it on that side of the ledger. I assume.
Absolutely. And hopefully we could take a quick look at that before we sign off tonight. Perfect.
Thank you,
Right.
Jim.
Yeah, and then just in a summary, I wanted to mention, in addition to the contractual IT services, this division includes all the software maintenance for some of our bigger packages, which includes Munis, which is our accounting and financial software, Quality Data, which is the software used in both the tax and assessor offices. It includes RecTrack, which is used by Arts Place, the pool, and the recreation department. Building permit software, which is kind of a town-wide software at this point. And I think I hit some of the bigger ones there. That all totals maintenance for all of those programs about $210,000 of this $526,000 budget. There's also data lines for our network that connects all our buildings. That's about $73,000 a year. That stays pretty stable year over year. And then finally, the rest of it is a combination of Microsoft licenses and other security software and other maintenance, totaling about $178,000 in this most recent request. So just to kind of give you a broad overview of what's included in this division. Just gonna go to general services next. If anybody has any questions on finance before we move on?
Anything, anybody?
Doesn't
Jim,
look
I
it.
hate to put you on the spot, but I'm gonna do it anyway. I
Yeah.
know you've been meeting with our rating agencies and.
Oh, yeah.
We've been priding ourselves on the fact that we are AAA rated community and, largely thankful to you and your department. How do you think that went? Obviously, I know I'm not putting on a spot to, I know you don't have any answers yet, but I heard it went well and I want to hear from you. Hopefully you feel the same way.
I'm glowing a little bit today because we heard from S&P that we did retain our AAA rating for S&P, and Fitz is on board for tomorrow's committee meeting for that. I'm pretty optimistic all the way around, and I'm thrilled that I thought it did go really well, and I think the rating agencies thought so too.
Well,
Yeah,
I
we just-
wanted to lob that up there for you, Jim,
Yeah.
because you and Gina and your staff deserve a lot of kudos.
Yeah, we just got the letter about an hour before this meeting started, so we were very happy to see that.
So assuming that happens, that's a very telling sign of the management that's going on in a very difficult environment. So you guys deserve a big pat on the back and thank you for your hard work.
Great work, guys. Thank you.
I think that, what drove that was Sean and his team as far as handling the COVID situation and how we navigated through that process. In our economy, as you know, with the building office and the real estate, our grand list growth year over year now, we had a lot of good things to say.
Yeah, we just to echo that, we Jerry and Jim and I all presented on that call, and it's really a three-part thing. The management, obviously our finances, and then Jerry did a great job kind of explaining some of the recent trends. And I gotta tell you, they loved hearing the breweries are coming to town. I don't know, that was really a spot for some reason they loved. So
Sounds like they're all beer drinkers,
I
right?
guess so. Yeah, there you go. So it was a lot of good things coming together, and it was a team effort.
It's great to see that a lot of things that we've tried to implement with staff and the town council and our collaboration have helped in a tough time. So it just shows that our collaboration is working. I do want to give the council some credit. We play a big role in a lot of this as well. And I can tell you, I'm very proud to be serving alongside every one of you because we've all taken this very serious. And this is a tough time. And not every community is doing really well. And it's not a shot on them, but I'm glad that our community is working through this the best we can. So thank you to everybody who's played a part in that. So thanks, Jim.
Sure. Okay, moving on to general services, page 68. And this is quite a hodgepodge what's included in this department. This covers our phones, copiers, some of the water in some of our buildings, paper postage, town dues for various organizations, including the chamber and the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities.
Jim, I'm sorry to interrupt. What page are you on?
Yeah.
Page 68.
In what book, Jim?
In the thin
Oh,
book?
wait a minute.
Because I'm on the
Okay,
thin book.
I'm
It's
sorry.
not the correct page.
Planning.
I'm sorry. I must have had a typo here. Hang on.
Yeah, that was planning.
Yeah. Try this again. Page 39. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Thank you, Joe.
Okay. And so, yeah, phones, copiers, water, paper, postage, townwide dues. That's pretty much what's covered in this department. There's a request of 270,333, which is an 8.38% increase.
Decrease.
And I'm sorry, decrease.
I was
And-
gonna say,
and-
yeah,
I got to make
take
sure I
the
get
credit where
that
you can, Jim.
in parentheses, yes. In The main reason for that is the elimination of a general services clerk, which cut 31,291 out of the permanent part-time.
Yeah, Jim, I can speak to this
Yeah,
a
maybe,
little more. Yep. So, and this ties in a little bit to the discussion in our presentation on the town manager's office budget, which we'll get into later. We do have a retirement in that position. And both not only the position itself, if you recall a couple years ago, I asked the council to move that out of the planning and zoning department, planning department position, that I moved it to general services so that it would be a little more of a catch-all. We could move this person to different departments to help fill in the town clerk's office when they had a busier season, in the tax and assessor's office. And, you know, that's worked, and it's worked pretty well. It hasn't always been ideal. And again, I can talk a little more about some of my plans for how that might work better going forward, kind of not through this position anymore. We also, that physical workspace for where this position is now is going to be the area that I have proposed as the human resources area department down the hall from my office, with the reorg in my office, which I know we haven't really gotten into detail on and probably won't tonight given the hour, but I just know there's probably more to come on that in terms of conversation. But for now, that position, I felt we could incorporate it into the reorganization that I referenced in my transmittal letter. And ultimately, sort of conveniently too, that person is announced they're going to be retiring. And ultimately, so there's a position there. Well, there's an elimination. There's not a formal layoff there either. So
otherwise, I think the costs are pretty flat for pretty much all of these services. We did do an audit on our phone accounts last year to make sure that we're getting charged appropriately by all the various telecom companies that we utilize. And generally, you know, postage is tough. Postage costs keep going up, but on the flip side, we've been able to do a lot more now with technology as far as, you know, emailing PDFs and so forth rather than using postage. So it's pretty straightforward budget at this point. Shauna or David, I'm not sure. I have debt service on my list. We could look at that next, or we can jump to capital expenditure for the finance and general services portion of it.
Let's do that capital budget for there, because that'll be a short item
Sure.
for the finance, because that's just one relatively smaller item, if that's
So,
all right.
Yeah, so the capital budget is in the summary book, which is the big book. And there's a tab actually called Capital Expenditure Plan Budget. It's the second from the last tab. And
page 148, I think, Jim.
yeah, 147 actually starts the finance department. So page 147, there's two projects here, one for revaluation and one for the technology reserve fund that we just talked about both of those a little while ago. But you can see I've got a request in here for $550,000 for the upcoming reval, which will be in fiscal 23. In the detail, is, well, a little bit more detail on page 148. There's a summary of cost components. So you could see part of that includes legal costs for appeals, 125,000, a little bit of part-time help for 10,000, commercial appraisal consultant, 45,000, and then the actual reval charges of 495.
Jim, did you mention, I might have missed it, did you mention that this is the physical inspection every 10 years.
I did not, but thank you, because that's important. This is a little bit bigger project than the last one we went through, which was just a statistical.
And so every 10 years, we're required to do a full physical inspection. So this
Right.
hasn't. So we're up now for our 10-year physical. That's why you see a larger increase there.
And I did take a look at what we might have available from unspent prior revaluation projects to see if we had anything, and did take that into consideration when we put these costs together, at least at this point.
The other item is probably worth mentioning here, and it might be on the minds of others here, but this at a dollar amount above 500,000 sparked a question that I had about whether this would need to go to referendum as something that would otherwise it's a state mandate. We did ask that of bond counsel and determined that offsetting proceeds that we contribute from previously appropriated funds like CNR would not require, therefore that would draw down. You can use that against the total dollar amount. So anticipating that we would probably do that, but I just want to make sure the council's aware that if we offset from previously appropriated CNR funds and get that below the $500,000 mark, this would not be a referendum item. And I think that's important, especially with reval, because we have to do it. It's a state mandate, depending on the cost, we can afford to have it fail at referendum. So I think that's an important consideration that the council's aware of. And again, I don't know, Jim can talk more about that.
I did look back 10 years ago, and actually we did kind of split the cost between bonding a portion of it and funding a portion of it with capital non-recurring funds. So I suspect we'll probably do something similar this round if this and as Sean said, this isn't a like to have, it's kind of a must have. I think for purposes of the recommended budget, I included it all in capital non-recurring, but certainly I can move that around as we fine tune the capital budget in general.
And Jim, just to make a statement, obviously, we're going to be looking pretty hard in what we fund through capital non-recurring, particularly items that don't have long-term useful lives. And I know we've been talking about that to make sure that we're not bonding over a 20-year time frame, something that only lasts 5 years or 7 years or even 10 years. And I think with some of the bigger capital projects on the horizon, like potentially the Chapman property, potentially school modernization, I think that discussion becomes even more important to make sure that we're trying to fund out of CNR as much as we can that doesn't have useful lives that match up well in terms of the long-term period. So I want to make sure we're focused on that.
Certainly use every bit of it for technology and also for our fleet vehicles that usually have useful lives of under 10 years.
Right.
And so definitely keep that in mind.
Yeah, and I know we've been really focused on that, and I think we've been doing a good job and a better job. But again, with these two big projects potentially on the horizon that are really important to this community, I think we've really got to focus more on it.
Yep.
Thank you.
The technology request is the second project on page 147, and you can see it's a $350,000 request this year and 210 in the out years. The 210 is a projected need based on past costs over the last decade. I believe we just divided what we need for server upgrades and things like that. But this year's request specifically for 350,000 is narrated a little bit more detail on page 149, and it includes 280,000 to replace Board of Education network infrastructure supporting school safety, specifically CCTV and access control, radio infrastructure, building management, and communications. That 280,000 is something that we're hoping to get some grant funding for, but they have to apply for it ahead of time. And as of the date of when we put this budget together, I wasn't sure where that stood. So I didn't assume we were going to get any grant funding, but if we do, I'll certainly let you know if that's a possibility.
That's the E-rate program, Jim, and I think folks may be familiar. We've had that in prior years, but that's the E-rate funding that we apply for with the technology school-related projects.
Peter?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick note, because we talked about IT earlier in the contract renewal for our IT contract. The technology study group is scheduled right now to meet on April 5th, and we'll be walking through a lot of the stuff that we've talked about tonight on the IT side.
Thanks, Peter. And perhaps we could circle back to go over this again, after we've had a chance to look at that in more detail at the committee level. And also included in the 350,000 was 70,000 to replace network firewalls to improve cybersecurity posture. So again, we'll look at that with the committee. On the next page, 150 is general services. And I won't spend much time here because a lot of this is the vehicle equipment replacement fund, and each of the departments, specifically Public Works and Fire and Police, this is their fleet equipment and vehicles, and so they'll be speaking on these individual projects when they have their say.
It's more fun to beat up on George about this stuff anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I heard George was asking for 2 scooters instead of 2 dump trucks this year.
I'm sure he's listening right now. So,
And Jim, if they
George,
make,
hope you're out there, buddy.
and if they make you explain it, Jim, you get to change any of these.
yeah.
You want a different.
And then
George always
finally,
gets beat up about all the stuff that we talk about. It's always Mr. Nawatney that gets roughed up over his dump trucks.
I think wheelbarrows powered by a scooter would be work just fine.
Yeah, I see him here. He keeps trying to get in, but I'm not letting him into the meeting. So we're just gonna leave it there.
All of a sudden, he's got a lot to say, right?
Yeah, he's raising his hand, but we're just gonna ignore it.
and then finally, capital planning account and building assessment / design. These are funds that we periodically replenish to help us navigate some of our bigger projects to make sure we get the appropriate costs to put forward for some of our bigger roads, bridges, and infrastructure projects. I think that's really all I wanted to show you. And again, I think we're going to probably circle back on a couple of these things as we go through the budget process. And I still have debt service on my list. I guess there was a couple things I just wanted to point out. Debt service seems like it's pretty straightforward, but I wanted to at least bring to your attention something to keep in mind as we go through the budget process, that we have still some reserve funds that we've been using to navigate not just this year's budget, but we still have some funds set aside for future years. And so if we look at page 130 and 131 in the summary book, which is the
vertical.
Actually, yeah, which is the big book.
Yeah.
I think this is just something that you'll want to keep in the back of your mind as we go through the budget this year. Page 131 is what we've currently projected for the use of our various reserve funds. And you can see this takes it out a few more years. It goes all the way out to 2024. As a reminder, we transferred in the nth hour of the budget process last year, largely because we had a pretty good surplus to work with. 616,000 from the general fund in fiscal 21 was transferred to the debt service reserve fund, and also 100,000 from the water pollution control fund. So there was an infusion of over 700,000 as a result of last year's budget process into this reserve fund, which I built into this use of debt reserve fund chart, mostly in the out years. And then on page 130, you can see that the total offsetting resources on page 131 are folded into the column that's got a 4 above it. Says less use of reserve funds. So that's what I'm projecting to use based on what's on page 131 for our current debt service. The column with the 1 over it, that's our existing debt service. And column 2 is debt service for projects that have already been approved. Keep in mind, we're bonding some of that in a couple of weeks, so I'm going to end up redoing this and shifting some of that into our existing bonded debt column. But for now, that's a pretty good projection. And then the column with the 3 over it is projected new capital expenditure plan debt. So that's the debt that's associated with the plan that's in this book for fiscal 22. It does not include school modernization. I'm sure I'm going to be doing a number of variations that perhaps spin off of this to provide more detail on how school modernization scenarios will impact going forward, and also on our mill rate and so forth.
And Jim, just to be clear, though, it does include the $5.9 million for phase 1 of
It
Chapman.
does, yes, it absolutely does. That is in Sean's recommended budget for the 5.9 on Chapman property. So that is in here.
And it includes anything in the whole 5-year plan too, not just the first year.
Yep. So, and again, I use a 4% rate of return assumption. We're going to be bonding 14 million on March 31st. We're also doing several refundings on some of our older bonds. And we also have the potential to potentially refund a clean water note. We're waiting for approval from the state on that. So there's a good chance that some of these hard numbers on our existing debt will go down if we're able to refund some of the bonds that we already have. So
it looks like over the next few years, some of our debt is going down, but nonetheless, our reserve funds are dropping off pretty quickly. So, we've got to be very careful and figure out how we want to manage that issue. We've got some of these pockets of dollars that we may be the beneficiary of. I think we want to consider using some of those dollars to kind of replenish some of this debt service reserve account so that we can continue to smooth out and some of these impacts. So I know you all know this already, but I'm just kind of saying it more for the public's edification, understand how we look at some of this.
I think there was one more page I wanted to share.
Jim, before you move on, while we're on this topic, it just might be an opportunity just to talk a little bit about the debt service that's associated with largely the water treatment plant upgrade and also any other sewer pump stations and other things that we've had sewer related debt. That's tracked separately than as we track our general obligation bonds, but they're all rolled into this debt service number.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the percent that the WPCA pays towards that?
Actually, I wouldn't mind because it did come up during our rating process recently too.
Correct.
The fact that the Water Pollution Control Fund does contribute a lot towards the debt for its operation. So we have general obligation sewer bonds, and we also have clean water fund notes that have supported the infrastructure at the water pollution control plant. And in fiscal 21, and also in this fiscal 22 recommended budget, the debt service that we've earmarked for the water pollution control plant to pay for by either way of paying directly through their debt service line item and or also including the $650,000 that it transfers to the general fund each year to help offset the debt service that the general fund pays for it. We're looking at that fund paying approximately 67% of their debt service for that operation. So,
Right. So
you
the
know,
last
since I've
couple
been
of,
here, there's always been, I think, an assumption that, you know, the plant in general does add value to the town. Obviously, we probably wouldn't have be able to have a lot of the bigger businesses that we do have in town if we didn't have that type of infrastructure. We have the prior 2 years, I think fiscal 19 and 20, we were paying a little bit more than the 67%. It was actually a little over 80%. But that was because we had a windfall from the settlement from the back sewer billing that from the prison complex, where we ended up getting I think it was $1.43 million of restitution from a problem they had there with the meter. So we were able to pay a little bit more because of that. It was good timing because we just brought on the new clean water fund loan at that point, and there was a lot of construction period interest that it had accumulated. So it kind of matched up perfectly with that. But it's something I think, you know, maybe we should take another look at and see, you know, is 70 or 67% the appropriate share that it should be paying.
yeah, I just think that's kind of why I brought it up. I think that at some point we should have this, you know, policy discussion with the council as to what you think that appropriate percentage should be. And there's a lot more information we can certainly give you. We don't have to settle it tonight, certainly, but I think that, you know, philosophically, we have to figure out what that right balance is for the sewer plant and the sewer users funding the debt service associated with the plant versus those folks that are not sewer users. But as Jim said, there's certainly other considerations with respect to the overall value that having a treatment plant, whether you're on the sewer or not, your business or your home, does add value to the community. So I think we have to just, something I want to have a discussion at some point and see where you feel that level should be. Again, as Jim said, in my proposed budget a couple of years ago, if you recall, I had eliminated a position at the plant, but offset that funding by having them contribute a little extra to the debt service associated, because it's a large chunk of our debt service, and I think it's you know, it's important that we are all kind of on the same page as to what the expectations are.
Well, we've talked about this quite a bit, and we did do a rate revision, as you know, not that long ago. So I guess I'm curious to see, are you suggesting or advocating for a higher percentage and therefore a rate increase for the sewer users?
No, but I think that as you see, you know, their budget, for instance, is just very simply is going down an operating budget, and obviously that as they contribute less than they did the prior year, again, because we had these one-time contributions that we put into the prior budget, was the expectation to replace those and have their budget stay flat, if you will, or increase modestly, or is that to be absorbed, as Jim was saying, kind of we've lowered the amount that they're paying from roughly 80% down to the 67, 68% of their associated debt service. So again, I think it probably bears more conversation. I'm not suggesting a change. I think more just confirmation that that's consistent with what your expectations are. And again, maybe when we go through the WPCA budget itself, we can talk a little bit about that and the various components that go into the 600,000 they contribute to the general fund for administrative expenses and everything else that are also associated with that.
Right. Thank you.
Yep.
I'm just going to add, there's no doubt that the sewer users in this town have weathered a lot of increase in the recent decade. But a lot of that increase was due to, increased mandates on the facility to take care of, for example, phosphorus and nitrogen removal. So it's not as an inexpensive service as it once was. And I think, we're in good company because pretty much all the towns that I've seen have had significant increases for the same reason. It's just a question of, where where do you draw the line as to how much you increase, sewer use charges?
Well, we ought to have that conversation, but it's a conversation for me that we've been talking about quite a bit. And we did have some rate changes and we did make some changes, particularly to commercial users. We've got to be very careful
Yeah.
that we don't start stifling the grand list growth maybe that we've been pursuing. So there's a lot of factors that go into this decision. So I would caution us not to make a flippant decision relative to this, because there's a lot of far reaching tentacles that this goes to, particularly grand list and our business community, et cetera. So, I'm certainly willing to have it, but I think we've got to be very careful what decision we make when it comes to this.
Point very well taken. The only other page I wanted to mention is on page 97, again in the summary book, that also deals with the debt service line item, and it just provides a little bit of a recap of how we've either grown or used the debt service reserve fund. That's in the middle of the page. You can see the history of fiscal 19, 20, 21, and 22. And you can also see where we added the 616,000 and the 100,000 from last year's budget process. And on the top of page 97, we'll give you some idea of the breakdown of the debt that we are paying as to how much is for general purposes versus sewer versus additional clean water fund notes for the sewer versus education bonds. So just some, I think, good summaries of the debt that we do have and how we're trying to mitigate the increases associated with it by the use of some of the reserves that we've been able to maintain over the years. And I'm pretty much done. The only other thing would be capital non-recurring, and I don't really need to point to a page on that. We budgeted $1 million last year. We put $1 million in this year. Historically, we were probably more in the $1.1 million range, and I think it's hopeful once we get past all this COVID stuff that maybe we'll get a chance to bump that up a little bit.
Mr. Bowery, back to you.
All right. Other questions regarding any of this? All right, then we have left, it's getting late. We have left town council and town manager, I believe, in the ones we wanted to get done tonight. What's your pleasure? Stay a little longer, finish this, or add them to another night?
Well, my feeling is that we try to stay to our 2-hour limit to the extent we can. These budget timelines are, we have a lot of these meetings and we are missing, 3 council members tonight for very good reasons. And I certainly want to send my best wishes out to Councilman Walsh and Councilman Slocum, who's dealing with his mom. So we wish him and her the best, obviously. So unfortunately, we're down for good reasons, a few council members, and I think I'd rather limit it so that we can get them back on board, because they're going to play an integral role to where we end up here.
All right, well then, if it's all right with everybody, since Mr. Talbot, your
I'm
thought?
sorry, Mr. Bowery, you can finish. I'll wait and
No, I was simply going to say, I think it seems to be the consensus, unless there's objection, is that, that we adjourn for the evening now, after your comments, that we adjourn for the evening. And then we'll pick up next week with or Thursday with public safety issues and tag on town council or town manager, which are really ours anyway. So they're not dependent on a department head to be here. They're flexible. All right, Mr. Talbot?
Yeah, my comment was related to just things to kind of put in the parking lot, so to speak. Having an advantage, and Sean, this is for you. Having the advantage of heard your presentation for the third time, the second today.
I know it started at 7:45 this morning, so you're like having deja vu in one day.
John did a presentation for the Government Relations Committee of the Cheshire Chamber this morning. So, but what I wanted to say, Chairman Barrowy, is that I'd like to look at some of the one-offs, like the Corona FEMA funds, the ESSER fund for education, the increase to the pilot revenue. Just some of those, just to kind of put in the parking lot, like to revisit.
Yeah.
And,
I'm gonna, I agree with that.
And like I said, since I had the advantage of hearing Sean's presentation for the third time tonight, that the one thing that popped up when he was talking about the increase in the solid waste tonnage, is there any benefit to getting a revenue stream where we create, instead of bring your child to work day, we start a bring your trash to work day?
It's outside the box. I like that.
Yes.
Nice thought, Mr. Talbot. Appreciate it. And the
I'm
only-
glad that's where you thought the kids were going.
Remember the American Rescue Plan, the dollars, there's some big dollars out there that could come into the various counties. But just for the public's edification, those dollars can only be used for certain line items. So obviously we're going to have to work through that and find out, to the extent if we're lucky enough to get a good number from that, they only can be used for certain line items. And we just can't plop them into our general budget and say, great, we got this inflow of money and we can use it any way we want. It's for specific reasons. Correct, Sean?
That's correct. That's correct.
So, we would want to get more background. I know you sent some information out to the council today, which outlines some of the areas that it can be used for. But, to the extent we know we're going to get some significant dollars there, we want to be thinking about what of those items we can be using it for.
That's right. And also remember that it is a one-shot deal. It's also over a couple of years. So it has to be spent by December of 2024, which really is the next 3.5 years too. So there's a lot of considerations for the council to wrestle with how to use those. And again, obviously there's no intention to use them in any one-shot capacity in the current year. But I think that having a careful plan for what we expect to do over the next 36 months is a wise thing to do.
And Sean, is it correct? It's 50% in the first tranche of money you get, and then 50% maybe no earlier than a year down the road. Is that what it said?
Yeah, the first 50%, I believe, being 60 days from enactment, and no later than, and then I think 12 months later from whatever that period is. So, yeah.
And when do we expect to get more info on what that amount would be specifically to the town of Cheshire?
Yeah, I think some of that clarity around the county information is sort of a separate issue. The rest is, I mean, the other numbers I presented, the 2.8 million and the 857,000.
Talking just the county money.
Oh, you're talking just the county?
Yeah,
I think I don't know
what better idea on. It's the county one that we really don't have any idea on how much it is and how much we may be getting.
I mean, yeah, my calculations are that it's the 165 million divided by the population of New Haven County, you get $194 per capita. Simply multiplying that by our population, it's about 5.6 million. Now, we'll see. I did get confirmation today from the staff person in Senator Murphy's office, and she cited the actual paragraph that said this funding is to be delivered to the state to be given to the municipalities within that county on a proportionate population basis. So I'll forward that email on so folks see it. It's as close as I've gotten, and that was really just this afternoon to, and all of this funds is passed through the state anyway, so that's not exceptional that it would go to the state first, but it appears to be intended to come to us. But again, before we get, it's a big number, and I think we need to make sure it's certain before we obviously plan anything with it.
And is it accurate that if you're less than 50,000 population, you have to go through the state? If you're greater than 50,000, you don't?
Yeah, everything if your population is 50,000 or higher, it's a direct funding from Treasury. If you're lower than 50,000, it's on a similar format to the CDBG, Community Development Block Grant system. And so that funding would go through the state to be dispersed, similar to CDBG, to the towns.
Hopefully they're dispersed similarly.
We'll be watching it closely.
And
We will.
before they change their mind.
All righty. So, Mr. Barwi, are you good? Are we ready to call for a motion to adjourn?
I'm all set, and I'll make that motion if you want.
Just before we do, any other questions or comments from members of the council or staff? And I know, Jim, your Deputy Director, Gina DeFilio, has been on the call all night. Gina, thank you so much for everything you've been doing to assist in that finance department. Great job. So thank you. And I guess if there's nothing else, I'll call for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Veliver. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jinks. You're welcome, Gina. Good night. Thank you for being here.
Good night.
All in favor of motion to adjourn? Motion
Aye.
passes unanimously of those that are here. Okay, good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Night.